All right, I think it's time to get started. It's 3 o'clock. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Katie Monahan, and I'm a communications strategist here at the Ohio Arts Council, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, TeachArtsOhio, Bolstering Arts Education Through Engagement. Before I introduce our presenter, there are just a few things I'd like to go over. First of all, everyone on today's call is in listen-only mode. This just helps to cut down on feedback issues during the presentation. So if you do have any questions, feel free to type them in using your Q&A box on your control panel. We'll incorporate your questions throughout the webinar, and there will be time for questions at the end as well. And if you have any audio issues or trouble connecting, we recommend refreshing your browser. And if that doesn't work, try logging off and then logging back in. And finally, today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll post the recording on our YouTube channel by the end of business on Monday. So if you weren't able to catch the entire live session or you'd like to listen again, you can find it there. So now on to our feature presentation. Today's presenter is our very own Jared Small. Jared is an arts learning coordinator here at the Ohio Arts Council, and he's here today to help us dive into the world of the OAC's newest arts learning program, TeachArtsOhio. So welcome, Jared, and the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Katie, for that marvelous introduction. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. Online, listening in, and if you're catching the recording, thanks for catching that. It's a pleasure to be with everybody this afternoon. We'll talk a bit about, as Katie mentioned, the OAC's newest arts learning program called TeachArtsOhio. And so with that, we're going to dive right into things. I will say if you've got any questions as we move along, feel free to just type them into the open question box. No need to wait until the very end. We can check them periodically, I think, and answer them as needed. So let's get rolling. Like I said, today we're going to talk about TeachArtsOhio, the Ohio Arts Council's Artist in Residence program for schools pre-K through 12. Before we do that, I do want to give just a bit of an overview of the Ohio Arts Council as a state agency. And the mission of the Ohio Arts Council is a state agency that funds and supports quality arts experiences to strengthen Ohio communities culturally, educationally, and economically. And today we're going to focus on that second bolded word, that last sentence there, educationally. The vision of the OAC is to provide leadership and voice for the arts to transform people and communities. We certainly think that through one of our programs, and indeed all of our programs, but especially TeachArtsOhio, it does just that, to transform entire education communities around the state. If you're curious of who we are as a state agency, you can see a couple numbers here. The budget of the Ohio Arts Council ranges about $14 million annually. That's allotted to by the Ohio legislator. And that comes to about $28 million per budget biennium. And about $1 million is received from the feds at the National Endowment for the Arts, and $0 of this federal money is spent on admin costs, which we're pretty proud of. And we love saying that $1 of OAC funding leverages about 44 additional dollars in communities across the state. So we're happy about the fact that organizations and schools and artists really leverage these OAC grants for additional funding opportunities and outcomes in their communities, both financially and otherwise. So we're happy about that match ratio. And just to give you kind of a sense as to how many grants this agency makes on a yearly basis, this past July, the Ohio Arts Council granted about 680 funded grants to Ohio schools and school districts, to Ohio artists and Ohio nonprofits, a pretty significant number. And certainly part of that number was our TeachArtsOhio program. We've got a couple lovely faces here on the screen in front of you. We've got our executive leadership. We've got Donna Collins, who's our executive director, and Dan Katona, our deputy director, both at the helm of steering our ship. Both always love to hear from the community and constituents. So do be aware that these are the faces of the OAC many times, and Also be aware that the Ohio Arts Council has an 18-member board that is appointed by the governor, and they more or less oversee the running of the agency, 18-member board from board members are around the state, indeed. And I wouldn't be doing my arts learning office any justice if I didn't also mention my partner in crime, Chiquita Mullins Lee. Both her and myself together manage the arts education programs at the Ohio Arts Council. You can see both of us on the screen there. You'll get my contact info a little bit later, certainly, but Chiquita is my right-hand woman in all of our programs, everything that we do here. So I want to talk about a bit about leadership at the agency, but also the fact that give some credits to my coworker Chiquita, who together we help again manage the arts education programs. But the reason why I'm talking to you today is because I am kind of the program coordinator lead on TeachArtsOhio, the artist residency program. So with that, we're going to dive right into the program itself, TeachArtsOhio. You can see we kind of tag it as customizable artist residencies for pre-K through grade 12 students in Ohio schools. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of the program and then some, I want to ask you all to do a favor who's listening right now. We're going to take a really quick poll. You're going to see it pop up on your screen right now. If you would, could you just let us know which one of these best describes you as in your day-to-day work, so to speak. So if you're an artist, let us know. If you're an arts administrator, certainly click that button. We'll take about maybe 20 or 30 seconds to let you respond to that, just so we get a sense as to who's kind of in the room. It might inform our conversation going forward just a bit, but do take a moment to click on that and also hit submit after you click that radio button.
Looks like we're waiting on a few more attendees to submit. Give it about 15 more seconds.
Thanks, folks. It's just telling for me. If you're curious, we've got a lot of arts administrators in the room, a couple who have selected other. Please, curious about that, what kind of roles you find yourselves in, and perhaps we can involve that in the questions later on. But with that, we're going to keep going ahead. The overline, kind of 30,000-foot view of TeachArtsOhio, more or less is meant to bring schools and community organizations together with teaching artists to share engaging, personal, high-quality arts learning experiences. So it's kind of important to emphasize the partnership component between teaching artists and school district, and in some cases also other community arts organizations to pull off an effective artist residency in a school. And kind of the 1, 2, 3 punch basics on TeachArtsOhio, really it goes to support grants to award schools in order to cover artist fees, and 100% of the artist fees are paid for using the OAC TeachArtsOhio grant. So that really is the reason for existence, is to support Ohio artists in Ohio schools, collaborating with schools to create and implement some effective artist residency projects. And one of the primary components of TeachArtsOhio involves teaching artists being in a school for a full school day, meaning a teaching artist would come in at the beginning of the school day when the bell rings and end or leave when the school day that bell rings again. The teaching artist is kind of mirroring what it means to be a full-time teacher in that school on any given day. So it's not so much kind of a 1-hour workshop or 2-hour workshop or performance, but more so for deeper engagement for longer periods of time throughout the school day. And another component of TeachArtsOhio really involves professional development for participating teachers and the wider school environment. So other teachers not necessarily involved in the residency day-to-day, also administrators and principals and school board members We think that this grant provides a wonderful opportunity to conceive some pretty engaging professional development opportunities for the wider education community. Things like hands-on art making with other teachers, things like presenting at a school board meeting to demonstrate what it means to be a professional artist or to learn what it means to be an artist, and even sometimes allow the teachers or administrators to do some hands-on art making themselves to learn what it's like, I suppose, to be an artist, in the studio or working out in the community and painting or making ceramics. So I really think of it as an exciting way to open up the walls of the arts classroom and kind of let the outside in, so to speak. I feel so often the arts or the music classroom or the theater is kind of isolated in a school. It's on the far end of a hallway that not many folks venture to unless they've got a good reason. So I really love that component of the TeachArtsOhio program with these professional development components kind of instilled and infused within the overarching program itself. A little more nuts and bolts behind TeachArtsOhio. I mentioned it goes to support longer-term and in-depth learning experiences, ranging from just 3 days up and through an entire school year. But the grants themselves are provided on a year-to-year basis. So every year, you can probably think of it as per school year. Every school year, we would we kind of start a new cycle, so to speak. So we're right now in the 2018-2019 school year, and we're looking forward towards 2019-2020. So the cycle kind of refreshes itself every school year. And if you're wondering, there is no cash match requirement, meaning a school or district wouldn't need to put up $5,000 if you're asking for a $5,000 grant. There are other elements of that, so a lot of in-kind contributions can be considered from schools because it does take teacher time and administrator time to help plan things like this. So we want to recognize that, certainly, but there is no required cash match, so to speak. And eligibility-wise, we're talking about Ohio's public, private, charter, and parochial schools pre-K through grade 12. So if you are a school recognized by the Ohio Department of Education, you would be eligible to apply for a TeachArtsOhio grant. And application deadline, we're looking at a February 1 deadline, and that's annually for the TeachArtsOhio program. And if you think through this really quickly, that is our next approaching deadline, and applications, I will say, are open now through February 1 at 5 o'clock p.m. So if you get out this webinar and you have the spirit strikes you, you can certainly begin the application now through February 1. We'd always encourage you to start sooner rather than later, of course. The closer we get to the deadline, the more folks start emailing and calling. So to do yourself a favor, certainly it helps to kind of think further in advance, not just with our TeachArtsOhio program, but in all the programs that we offer. And so if you're thinking, well, how long can my residency last? What's best for me? I would say it's probably circumstantial. What's good for one school or school district probably might be better or worse for another district. But in general, we kind of break out these residencies into 5 categories. One, the shortest residency being an express residency, which is within a single week, again, a minimum of 3 full residency days, and then ranging through basic, grading period, full semester, academic year, which typically lasts about 36 weeks. And the thing I love about this is there's a lot of flexibility, and we mentioned customizable at the beginning of this. TeachArtsOhio is really meant to work within whatever you thought was best in terms of timeline. The only real requirement is just a minimum 3 days, and you could do anything from a 1-day-a-week residency for an entire school year to 2 to 3 days a week residency for a grading period or a semester, and go from there. We've had some grantees do, every Monday and Friday, you've got this visual artist who specializes in Mosaic murals come into the school, and Mondays and Fridays become Mosaic Mondays, or Theater Fridays. So there's a lot you can do within this program that kind of opens the doors to being creative and, of course, working within your own schedules or the schedules of the school and the school district, because we certainly recognize that scheduling can sometimes be an obstacle or a challenge when you're talking about schools and teachers. So this program, I think, responds to that quite well. And there's a point that I really want to emphasize here, and that is that the TeachArtsOhio program really is meant to supplement and not supplant arts instruction in schools. And by that, we mean that we want to build up our teachers and schools and what they're already doing. And TeachArtsOhio is not meant to help fund a full-time arts teacher in a school. There really is no substitution, we think, for a full-time licensed or certified arts educator in the classroom. However, what we think this program can do and does do is to supplement what's already being done in the classroom by these arts or science or social studies or English teachers, what they're already doing and the curricula within which they're already working. So we really want to emphasize the collaborative nature of the process. You've got a teaching artist who is an expert artist, we like to say, as well as a teacher who's well-versed in the learning standards and the school environments that they work in. So it is really a collaborative nature, and we want to emphasize that point that TeachArtsOhio is not hiring an arts teacher or replacing anyone. We're meant to fill a gap, so to speak, in a school's curriculum, but really to infuse arts integration aspects into it. So it's a point that I think is worth mentioning, and you'll probably hear me continue to say, because it's very true and gets at the core of what this program is meant to do. And if you're wondering about timeline, you'll see that on your screen right now. We've got a November 1st, like I said, applications are now available in ARDI, which is our online grants management system. I'll talk about that a bit later. But this is the general timeline. I mentioned that February 1 deadline annually. You can expect that coming. And sometime in March of 2019, we'll be doing what's called a peer panel review, which is open to the public, and where all of our TeachArtsOhio grants will be reviewed by a peer panel. And after that, that is when applications get scored. And then in July, which is just following our July council meeting, is when we make award announcements based on the recommendations from the peer panel. And then you have about until August 30th to kind of sign on saying that you accept the grant agreements. And after that, depending on how long your residency lasts, you'll be paid the whole grant up front or partial payment up front after you sign that grant agreement. And then, like I said, the 2019-2020 school year is when activities are occurring. So again, even though applications are open right now, we're looking a year ahead into the next school year for school year 2019-2020. And generally speaking, projects would wrap up by the end of next school year. And then we have what's called a final report deadline of usually around July 30th of 2020. That's following all of the projects, when you would submit back to us kind of what you did with the project, what went well, what was some unexpected outcomes or happenstances. We can certainly talk through procedures as we move along here, but that is kind of the basic outline of the TeachArtsOhio program itself. And so I mentioned just briefly the peer panel review and the application procedure, and I want to dive a bit more into, once you submit this application or when you're crafting your application, what are panelists looking for? Because again, it's not the OAC staff that are scoring you per se, although I'm always happy to read what you've written. It is the panel that's reading through and scoring accordingly with what you see now on your screen. It really breaks down into 4 distinct categories of what we call review criteria. It breaks it out into program quality, community engagement, how you'll define and measure success, and resource management, or how the school or the education community is going to demonstrate a commitment to collaborative learning. And that could be financially, it could be through allocating space like a theater or a gymnasium, but you'll want to become pretty intimately familiar with these review criteria, mostly because the panel uses this as a scoring guide, but also because these are the questions that you're going to see when you start writing your application. They are going to almost mirror identically the questions in the application and the review criteria. So we like to think that we're almost giving applicants the answer when we show them this review criteria, because we're just asking the how at that point. And if you are able to address each of these individually, on the whole, we've seen applicants do quite well. And I'll talk a bit more about the review criteria as we look into the guidelines a bit later. But for now, just be aware that these do exist. This is kind of what the panel is using as their scoring rubric when they're reviewing applications. And you'll want to be certain that how you craft your proposal really keeps in mind this review criteria as you move forward and throughout the process. So I've done a lot of talking about kind of the nuts and bolts, ins and outs of the program, TeachArtsOhio. But maybe you're thinking, I've got some ideas, maybe you could use some ideas. I wanted to call out a few examples of what we've seen work really well around the state, either their current or past TeachArtsOhio grantees. I wanted to be sure I gave you some concrete examples that might perhaps spark something of an inspirational moment for you of what's possible, or perhaps to get you to think a bit more outside the box, because I think one of the exciting components of TeachArtsOhio is to expand what's being done, or expand the idea of what's possible in the arts classroom or any other classroom for that matter. So with that, I wanted to mention briefly just a few examples. You'll see on your screen here, we've got the Portsmouth City School District down there in Scioto County. What they have done through TeachArtsOhio is what's called a human rights garden. It's what the arts teacher down there has called it. And more or less what that is, it is a gathering place for students and the community writ large to kind of serve as a focal point and a jumping off point to discussing, conversing, or solving issues pertaining to problems facing the Portsmouth community, things like food insecurity or a lack of clothing. You might know that Portsmouth itself is a high need school district, and the art teacher down there has kind of responded accordingly to develop this kind of space that the students can work in and base it on to discuss these wider issues affecting them on a day-to-day basis. And it's based on the United Nations Human Rights Council recommendations. So that was kind of used as a jumping off point. And what the students did with their TeachArtsOhio grant was that they, and the art teacher in collaboration with professional artists, really helped design the Human Rights Garden from kind of a landscape design view, as well as with kind of the visual arts aspects that go along with it, like creating the benches. Some of the benches you really can't tell in the picture, but they are tiled mosaics. Along with this Human Rights Garden, they've also developed, in partnership with their community stakeholders, what they're calling a food pantry and a clothing pantry, where members of the community can walk into the pantry and just take what they need, be it food, clothing, students included. And there's this through line of art throughout the pantry and the Human Rights Garden. And the school and the art teacher utilize the TeachArtsOhio grant to develop the artwork and the artistic infusion necessary to pull something off like this. What you see on the left is a couple students painting each other's faces in plastic molding, more or less, that is going to be used as kind of a planter to hang in the human rights garden and food pantry. So you've actually got students' faces serving as pots, so to speak, and really you can see that they're enjoying painting their faces in there, but it's kind of part of this wider component of, you know, it being a community space meant for everybody with an artistic flair, certainly, but made for and by the students of Portsmouth. This in that picture really good at Portsmouth High School. So one of those examples I like to talk about, certainly because this was used as a leveraging point, this grant, to engage wider community partnerships, other local funders down there, and the wider community, and is really making a pretty distinct and major impact throughout the city, and certainly in the school. It is a flash of inspiration, so to speak, but something of a unique project that I don't think many art teachers have considered or know much about, so something I'm continually interested in. Another example, you see on your screen here, some glass tile mosaics that have been affixed to the front facade of Benjamin Logan Middle School, located in Bellefontaine, Ohio. And you see on the right-hand side, it's the artist in the foreground and the art teacher in the background. They worked together to help design and carry out a mosaics project with the students at the middle school. So the students were involved from the very beginning, from designing what the mural might look like, through creating it, and by I mean even using hammers to bash the tiles into pieces, of course using appropriate safety measures, and all the way through designing it and affixing it to the front walls. And you can see in the background of the picture on the right what the final product looked like. It really is a beautiful work of art that everyone that walks into the school on a daily basis walks through and by. And the teacher tells me that when parents come in for parent-teacher conferences or guests to the school come in, they look at that and just marvel. And you can see it's a source of school pride really for them. And getting the chance to work with a professional artist, Ohio artist, throughout the whole process has been an incredible opportunity for students to learn sort of the tricks of the trade of mosaic muraling and mosaics in general, but also what it means to work together as a team to design something a bit broader than the individual child. So taught a lot about teamwork, and also I'll say one more thing about this project, that as part of it was a professional development art night, so to speak, at a local barn in the Bellefontaine area, where all teachers and staff of the school were invited to partake in making their own glass tile mosaics. So participants were asked, staff and teachers were asked to bring in objects that they'd like to have tiled, and the artist worked with them on tiling them. So you see everything from football helmets to personal mementos to picture frames, to a lot of college-related memorabilia like OSU pendants or something like that. So it was really great to see what teachers got to do when it came to doing kind of these hands-on art-making activities. And you had folks like custodians coming that work in the school, you had the principal coming, certainly other teachers. So it was really great to hear about that, you know, that this was an opportunity afforded for folks to learn what was happening in the art room on a day-to-day basis, what their kids are doing and what they're talking about when they say, you know, mosaic murals. It's been a really, I think, a successful project that is ongoing, certainly. One more example I'll bring to your attention that's not visual arts related, but is related to music. You're looking at the front and back album cover of the Midview High School singer-songwriter class. It's a CD that the students of the songwriting class, had put together as part of a TeachArtsOhio project that helped support a professional singer-songwriter in the Cleveland area and recording artist as well, who came into Midview High School's music classes to help teach the kids the ins and outs of writing songs and you know, the music theory behind it and the recording industry writ large, and all of those good things that go into producing an album. Many kids have not had the chance to think like this before or do something like this, so the choir teacher up there in Midview had this wonderful idea to bring this professional recording artist into the classroom, teach them how to write, what to look for, and then eventually turn it over to the children to actually write songs themselves and then record those songs in a professional artist recording studio. And you would be amazed when you turn over kind of the pen, so to speak, to students and you ask them to write about really what's ever on their mind and put it in a song format or into music. You'd be amazed what these kids come up with. It really tugs at your heartstrings a bit, but also gives you a ton of hope for the future. And what I really loved about this project was that after the kids submitted their samplings and their recordings, the choir teacher actually then turned it over to the teachers at Midview High School to select or to vote on the songs that they wanted to include in this school album. And I thought that was a really unique and engaging way to include the wider school community and environment and staff, certainly, to have kind of a hand in the final project. So again, it was really a whole community-wide, school-wide effort to get this album off the ground. It took the work of certainly the artists and the kids. And it's not something that usually children are exposed to, or if they are in school, it's not as in-depth as this could be, or as we see here as it was. So a lot you can do with things like this. These are just three kind of examples that stick out at me as being great opportunities to consider or to use as kind of a jumping off point. But with that, I'm going to move away from the examples and talk just a bit about the artists themselves who are typically involved in TeachArtsOhio. You might be wondering, who do these artists come from? Do I have to pick from a certain list? And for that, I want to mention that the Ohio Arts Council does make available what we call an Arts Learning Artist Directory, and that is on our website, and I can go to it right now actually. You can see on our website that if you just go to oac.ohio.gov under Resources, Directories and Databases, it's the very first one, Arts Learning Artist Directory. You'll see on the left-hand side of my screen a list of artists who are more or less open for business or open for collaboration with schools and school districts around the state. We can take the visual arts, for example. If you're looking for a ceramicist, you can kind of scroll through these artists here. One thing I'll mention is that these artists, visual arts and otherwise, is a statewide artist directory. So not just folks based in Columbus or Cleveland or Cincinnati, but we've got artists from all around the state in all corners. So if you're wondering, where do you start in terms of picking an artist, this will be one good resource to maybe use. Again, you can scroll through a multitude of artistic genres, from music and creative writing to design, dance, theater, the traditional and folk arts. All definitely a resource you'd want to consider. Along with our directory on the OAC website, I do want to call everyone's attention to a couple other organizations in Ohio that have similar artist rosters. And one is the Ohio Alliance for Arts Education. You can see their logo on the top left right here. But the Ohio Alliance for Arts Education also has their own roster based on, like ours, artistic genre. You can click through and see what kind of artists are open and looking for collaboration efforts. You can scroll down here And really, I think the one key point here with the Ohio Alliance for Arts Education's roster is that it's Columbus or Central Ohio based primarily, although they do have folks around the state. There's probably, I would say, a majority of folks are in the Central Ohio area. If you're in the Cleveland area, you've got the Center for Arts Inspired Learning. They've also got their own roster of artists. Again, the Center for Arts Inspired Learning, they do a lot with teaching artists. You can scroll through their offerings as well for artists who are working in schools or interested in working in schools. So that's our arts learning directory on the whole. The other option, if you've got a project in mind or something you want to accomplish, you can just give me a call. I am always happy to think through with you the kinds of projects you envision or want to implement, and together we can help find the right artist who's got the right experience working with children and in schools, and who's doing what you want to do as well. So I'm always happy to talk through the possibilities or perhaps names come to mind. So do give me a call. You'll see my contact information. It's on our website, but it's also will be at the end of this webinar. But I'm always happy to serve as a resource too, if you've got anything in particular that you'd like to accomplish. So we've talked about the artists and we've talked about the grant application process a bit and some examples. I do want to mention one more thing about the teaching artists. You're not required to select from any particular list. The only real requirements I would say would be that they are a working professional artist who has education experience working with children in schools. And what that looks like can vary, and indeed it does vary a bit. But we do, as part of the application process, want to see artist resumes, artist experience in schools, the artist's depth and breadth of work samples to demonstrate to a panel that this would be a good fit for the school. So just a quick note on the artist before I move on to how we apply. So before I do that though, I want to stop and see if Katie has anything to say. I realize I've been rambling on for just a bit, so I'll stop there.
No, I just, there's a question kind of related to the artist I thought we'd ask. Do artists need to undergo a background check as part of TeachArtsOhio?
Good question. So teaching artists are treated as a vendor or a contractor when it comes to the artist's work within a school district. So that means that the artist would need to go kind of the standard route of being a contractor in a school district, and most often, probably all the time, I would say that does involve a background check of some sort. So we do make it a requirement or an expectation as part of TeachArtsOhio that every artist going into the school that's being supported through this TeachArtsOhio grant is going through a standard background check with like their local police department of some sort, or whatever processes that a school district would have in place. Perhaps for a new teacher or again a contractor would be the same situation here with the artists. So it's a good question. Feel free to let me know if you've got any other follow-up with that. But in general, I would say the artist is a contractor with the district, even though they're being paid through this TeachArtsOhio grant. You'll want to make sure this artist does get that required background check before starting work in the school.
Okay, great. And I just wanted to remind everyone also, you're more than welcome to use your Q&A box to ask questions throughout. We're happy to pause and address them like we just did. And I think that's it for now, so carry on.
Sure thing. So I want to talk just a bit, if you're interested in applying or you know someone who's interested in applying a school, or if you're a nonprofit who's curious as to how you could work with the school and making this all come to fruition with the TeachArtsOhio grant. Before you apply, I would certainly encourage everyone to review the TeachArtsOhio guidelines, which I mentioned a bit earlier on, but the guidelines more or less give a pretty in-depth overview of what the program intends to do or how it works. It talks a bit about eligibility. And it also mentions that review criteria I had briefly talked about earlier on as well. Those guidelines are kind of your holy Bible, so to speak, as to how the program works and kind of how to craft the best application you can. And I'll show you really quick where you can find the TeachArtsOhio guidelines. They are, like most things, on our website. And I'll show you where you can find them. If you go to our home page, you can click on the Grants tab right there. Scroll on down just a bit, and you'll want to look under the Arts Learning drop-down menu. You'll see Arts Partnership is one of our other arts education programs. And TeachArtsOhio's guidelines are right here. You can click on the PDF. It'll open up what the guidelines look like. Just a quick, just a couple of pages of just kind of some guidance as to what we're talking about when we say TeachArtsOhio. Gives some tips on how to plan for the residency experience. It also goes into some details on how to actually apply for the program itself. So I would encourage you to give those a read. There's the review criteria too. It breaks it down into some further categories by points what the panel would end up using. But give those guidelines a read. There is the timeline for each year's project. So those guidelines are actually revamped for the next couple of years of TeachArtsOhio funding. So give those guidelines a read. Also, before you apply, I would say you'll want to give me a call. If you're a school or a school district that has never applied to the Ohio Arts Council for grant funding before, you will need to call us in order to get into our ARTI system. It's our arts management, arts grant making system, so to speak. And we need to set you up with a profile and your school with a profile before you're able to actually start the application. It's about a 2-minute process. All we really need is just the name of who's going to be writing the grant and the school district's employer identification number, or the federal tax ID number for tracking purposes on our end. So we just need some of those pieces of information, and we can get you going and all set up pretty lickety-split. And it's worth saying that every application submitted to all of our programs, not just TeachArtsOhio, but everything is done through our ARTI system. And that is kind of a non-negotiable at this point. We are moving away from hard copy grant applications and hard copy grant archives. So everything is digital. And we certainly encourage all folks, if you're having problems with ARTI, to get in touch with us. But particularly if you're a school or a school district, you'll definitely want to give us a call before diving into the grant writing process, as it is it's a requirement before you can start your grant. And there's my contact information right there again. You see my phone number, my direct line, and my email. It's on our website, but there it is just for note-taking purposes. So I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit now and talk just a bit about grant writing. And you know, I've done these presentations in the past, and a lot of participants have mentioned, well, it's great that you talk about the program and the guidelines and all of those wonderful resources, but you know, I'm a first-time grant writer, or I don't have much experience writing a grant. Can you help me out? And the answer always is absolutely, because here at the Ohio Arts Council, it's kind of our bread and butter. Myself and probably most folks here read a lot of grants and hear from a lot of people in the field. And so we've kind of, we've learned a thing or two when it comes to crafting these applications and writing the proposals. So I did want to touch as part of this webinar just a bit about things you should be keeping in mind when you're running a grant. Perhaps you're a first-time grant writer yourself. If you're a teacher or a principal and are interested, we're happy to make some tips available to you. So with that, let me dive a bit more into this, just to some tricks of the trade, so to speak. And it won't come as a surprise, likely, that before you apply, you'll want to, again, I guess I can't emphasize this enough, is to read the guidelines themselves. It will give you a fantastic overview of everything the program is meant to do. And also, I mentioned the review criteria. You'll want to make sure you're addressing that kind of bullet by bullet, so to speak. And also, if you've ever got a question, if you're in doubt, always, 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 please feel free to give me a call or anyone here a call. We'll connect you to the right resources. we really pride ourselves on accessibility here at the Ohio Arts Council. And if we don't know an answer to a question, we will find someone who does. Oftentimes it's someone in-house, a staff member. We've got a great staff here. But if you've got any questions on TeachArtsOhio application in general, just give me a call. I'm always available to answer any questions. And before I advance to the next slide, I want to call your attention. There's kind of some more detailed grant writing tips we do make available when you're crafting your application. You can find it, again, on our website. If you go to our homepage, oec.ohio.gov, click on that Grants tab again. On the right-hand side of your screen, there's actually, we make available a grant writing tip sheet. You'll see it right here. It's a clickable PDF, and it brings you up to a couple pages of tips to write a great application, you say. Some of the things I touched on so far, some things that get a little more detailed, some kind of, like I say, tricks of the trade that really piques a panel's attention, so to speak, and that would bode well for a high-scoring application. So you can give those a tips. These are pretty universal. Some are unique to the OAC. Some are a little more generalized, but I would say you give it a read before you craft, or if you're just interested in grant writing, we do want to make that resource available to folks, certainly. And one more thing before I move forward. You know, actually, I will continue onwards, and I will just start talking about if you think you're prepared to start writing the application. You know, what would you say when you are starting to write the application? What would you want to keep in mind? And I would say these are kind of the top 6, so to speak, ideas you should probably just give some consideration to. I won't read them all, but I think a few that pop out at me include assuming that nobody reading your application knows anything about who you are or where you come from, or I mean, this is your school or the children you work with. We do pride ourselves on putting together a pretty great peer review panel of arts educators, in my instance, and artists from around the state who know their stuff and who can give a pretty successful and quality review of each application. But it's always good to assume that no matter what you're applying to, that to kind of start from square one and summarize and then write about yourself and your school and your ideas, assuming that there's not much known about kind of who you are. I'll say one more thing about this slide. It is to have someone else read your application for you. An unbiased third party, we say here, but even a fellow teacher or another artist who might not speak the same language as you, we tend to want to shy away from using too high-tech or highly involved educational terms. I would say it's nice to reference learning standards in your proposals for arts education grants here at the OAC. We try to allow it to connect to the grant between Ohio's content learning standards. So it's something to keep in mind in terms of technical grant writing and technical language. But in general, we definitely encourage folks to seek out other readers when you're writing a grant, because oftentimes you're doing it in kind of a silo, and you want to have a kind of a unbiased third party again to think through this with you. And I will also say, for me, once you write or draft an application for consideration at the Ohio Arts Council, I and our coordinators are all happy to give your draft application a full review. If you're a new grant writer, we want to make that available, that option available, and in fact, we're always happy to do it. If you want to kind of submit your application for review, we just ask that you do it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ahead of the grant deadline, so we've got some time to give it its full consideration and review on our end. So it is a service, not a service, but it's something we just, you know, it's part of our job here, and part of what I love to do really is to help folks out when it comes to being as successful as they possibly can in writing these applications, because we do want to help out those first-time grant writers or those inexperienced grant writers, oftentimes who are in the schools and school districts, or teachers who are not as grant writing savvy. We're here for you. Always happy to read what you've written. There's a button actually in RE once you start writing your application to request feedback, and we'll get notified of that, and we can go from there. We can have a conversation or an email exchange with just what our thoughts on your application itself. After you hit submit, once you've finished writing your application, we always encourage folks through all of our grant programs to listen in on our panel meeting discussion. And again, it's open to the public. So if you're located in the Columbus area, we typically do them in our offices downtown. We also web or live stream the audio of the open panel. So if you can't make it to Columbus, you can log on and listen to the applications up for review. It is a fascinating and incredibly compelling experience getting to sit in on these panels or listen to the panels to really understand where these different panels are coming from, kind of the common threads that might come up in reviewing applications. So we'd always encourage folks to do that. Panel days do differ. They're on our website, on our calendar. The TeachArtsOhio panel, again, is in March, and you'll see on the March calendar. And I would just encourage folks, if you're interested in a TeachArtsOhio grant or otherwise, to seek out some panels to sit in on or listen in on. You can learn a lot. And finally, if you're not selected for funding, the first go-around or the next go-around, definitely try and apply again. We do make available panelist comments to all of our applicants. They are available to you, whether you're successful in the panel process or not. You will get a copy or a summation of how the panel kind of perceived your application, the critiques and the strong points of every application. You will receive that after applying, and we always encourage you to utilize that as kind of a springboard going forward. So before I keep going here, I want to take just a few minutes to maybe even walk you through what an actual TeachArtsOhio application looks like. It's online, of course, as I mentioned. I'm going to pull one up here. It's an example one, so I'm not going to pull up anyone applying or who's done so in the past, but let me pull up kind of what you would see when you're starting to craft your application. Let me take a second here to log back in. It looks like the system timed out. Oh, that's great. Bear with me, folks, as I'm going to try one more. Yeah, well, I'm not sure why that's not working. Let me try one more thing. That should work.
Okay.
Yeah, let me pull up what you might see when you're starting to apply for a TeachArtsOhio grant. So this is just what, again, a sample application of what it looks like once you're into the system itself. So you'll see some tabs at the very top here. You'll scroll down. It's got some instructions for filling out the application in RD. And we like to think it's pretty simple. You'll be asked for a project title and project start and end dates. Getting into a couple more details. School districts aren't a fiscal agent, so you'll click no on that. Or schools are. A couple other nuts and bolts questions. This is kind of gets at the heart of the application. You'll hear the residency information tab. It asks, the kind of category you're interested in applying for, the express all the way through academic year. Talks about, it asks you for the discipline that you're interested in doing. Again, you've got a host of menu options to choose from. It also asks if you've selected an artist. It's okay if you haven't. If you have, we're interested in knowing their name. If you haven't, no biggie, we'll just leave that blank. Then we'll ask for some demographic instances of about your school. the bulk of the application, I would say, is on this narrative tab right here, and that is the proposal, I'll call it. But this is what I was referring to when I was talking about the review criteria. You've got these questions that are pertaining to the review criteria almost verbatim, and you'll want to utilize these boxes below to respond to these bulleted questions. I will say that if you respond to each of these bullets, you have a great chance of certainly piquing the panel's eyes and interest, but also of addressing this review criteria that I keep emphasizing. That you'll see as we go along, they're broken out into bulleted questions. Just take it bullet by bullet, I would say, and go from there. You'll see defining and measuring success. Again, the questions are almost verbatim to what's on the review criteria and what panelists are being asked to score you on. There is a resource management section too. So this, again, the narrative portion up here, it's the bulk of the application that will probably take you a decent amount of time compared to the other ones. But we like to say that the application itself is just 5 questions. It includes a summary bit of detail here, and that's about it. The budget section itself, you can open up your budget section. It's not too involved. We're just asking you to talk about how much money you're looking to request based on the number of days you're looking to have the artist in the school. So that would go under your OAC request. And there's instructions up here. I won't get into them now, but the budget itself is rather basic. And this total residency budget in the school district column, it's just the dollar amounts you would assign to those in-kind donations, so to speak, of teacher time, administrator time, and others down here, and also supplies and materials. So if you've got the school is okay with purchasing paintbrushes or the tile mosaics, you could put that on the school district line. So that's an overview, a quick overview of the budget and what it looks like. And then I'll move to one more tab here. It's called the support materials tab. It looks like a laundry list of things we'd like you to include in the application. I promise you it's not as foreboding as it looks. These are just suggestions of things you might want to consider that would augment your application. Things like the biographies of teachers or other folks involved in the residency. You'd want to include some letters of support from school district personnel like your superintendent or principal. If they're not actively writing the grant, they could certainly write a quick letter of support, kind of throwing their accolades at the idea of having an artist in the school. Other things like if the schools have forgotten any press, artistic or otherwise, you certainly want to include that. So any kinds of evaluation or I would say letters from students or parents are great as well, kind of throwing their weight behind the proposed project. And then down here, we also talk about the teaching artist support material. I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but if you know who you want to work with when it comes to the teaching artist, you want to pay special attention to this section down here. We would want you to include things like the teaching artist bio or resume, some kind of AV support material that tells us, the panel, who the teaching artist is, and kind of as a vote of confidence that they'll be successful in the classroom. It's also really helpful to have a teaching artist letter of commitment saying that they fully commit to the terms of what's being proposed here in the number of days of the residency. That doesn't need to be anything fancy or on any official letterhead, just something short and brief saying that the artist is willing and is looking forward to working with the school and school district. And then finally, a photograph of the teaching artist, just to keep things in line on my end, quite frankly, of who we're talking about here. It's helpful to have that and for the panel to see. So that's the support materials. Successful applications are ones that offer a good deal of support materials, but not an overburdened amount to put on panelists. So you'll want to kind of strike a balance of how many support materials and what you include, and kind of be cognizant of the kinds of materials you throw in there. But do be aware that this is a tab that you'll want to pay attention to between that, the budget, the narrative. in the residency tab, that's the bulk of the application right there. After you're done, you'll want to preview it and submit, and that'll be that. You will have applied to the TeachArtsOhio program, and we will be in touch following that. So that is TeachArtsOhio in a nutshell. If you've got any questions on that for the time being, I see we're almost approaching 3 o'clock. But feel free to utilize the question dialog box in Zoom. And we're going to keep trucking along here. I'll leave TeachArtsOhio at that. Again, you can always give me a call if you want to talk more about the program, any projects you have in mind, or just to talk in general. We're always happy to hear. But there's one final event we want to make everyone aware of who's listening, and that is our Ohio Arts Council Arts Impact Ohio Conference happening in just a few short weeks. I'll let Katie talk a bit more about that.
Sure. So if you actually want to learn more in the arts ed realm, we actually have a workshop session dedicated to crafting artist residencies in schools at our upcoming conference, which takes place on December 5th and 6th at the Hilton here in downtown Columbus. There's still time to register, and we would love to have everyone join us for the 2 full days of thought-provoking discussion centered around the exploration of the intersection of arts. We'll also have plenty of networking opportunities, performances, and nuts and bolts workshops that address topics facing artists, art educators, and arts administrators. So we have a wonderful lineup of presenters, and the full agenda is available on the webpage, which is listed here on your screen. You can go there, find out who our speakers are, look at their bios, see some of the agenda, register for the conference, and also book in our hotel room block, which closes on Monday. So if you'd like to get in on that, we'd encourage you to do so Monday, November 19th. I think, unless you have anything else you'd like to add, Jared? Yeah.
Nothing to add on the conference.
Oh, it looks like.
I want to, yes, I want to emphasize actually Katie's point that there's going to be a session at our conference on crafting and designing your own artist residency in schools. So you'll hear from a few folks who have been successful at it, from artists and teachers, and it would serve as a great kind of next step if you're interested in designing your own residency in a school or otherwise for that matter, to come hear that session. It's something that you'll definitely want to be keyed in on, so to speak. I know we're at 4 o'clock. I'm wondering if you've got any questions, maybe some quick questions we can answer or respond to in the next minute or so, and then we can maybe leave it at that. But Katie, do we have anything on the screen here you see coming in from folks?
Yeah, sure. Can you talk a little bit about how competitive the TeachArtsOhio program is? I mean,
yeah. So the question is, if I'm understanding it properly, it's how competitive is the grant process itself? And I'm going to read through the lines here a little bit and think, if you apply, what are the odds that you'll get funded? Maybe even how much of that will be funded. So I will say, with TeachArtsOhio being in its 2nd year of the program, we've gone through 1 full cycle of applications whose projects are happening right now. We received 48 applications total this last go around, and we funded a total of 42 applications. 42 out of 48 actually received full funding. So there is no partial funding with TeachArtsOhio. Whatever grant amount you ask for, and if you're successful in securing a grant, you will be awarded that full amount. Pending signing the grant agreement. But it's a good question. We'd like to think that TeachArtsOhio, with it being an arts education program, I'd like to say that it's not less competitive, but your odds are a bit higher to really become fully funded, I'll say, and to really get the resources needed to implement your project wholly, in all ways that you see fit through this grant. So. Yeah, the competition, it's always worth considering because you do go to a peer panel, but we like to think that the stats are in your favor, I suppose, when it comes to this program in particular. So it's a good question, and I'm not sure if we've got other time for any more questions. I'll let Katie be the decider on that. Katie, do we want to take any other questions?
Sure. So let's see. Let's take this one. Can multiple schools in a school district apply for a TeachArtsOhio grant?
Multiple schools in a school district can apply for a TeachArtsOhio grant. They would actually become two separate applications. So if you think about it this way, you should think that if it's one school that's applying, it's one application. And that might mean you've got two schools doing two entirely different projects with different artists. Let's say for Columbus City Schools, you've got multiple schools applying, doing different things. They would apply as two applications separately. If you've got a teacher who is working at multiple schools, as often the case with arts teachers, and they're spending their mornings at the middle school and their afternoons at the high school, that would also be two separate applications because we think that there's a lot to be said about the different school environments that you'd be crafting an application towards, or a different population of students. So if you're one of those teachers who does work at multiple schools but want to work with an artist across all of your classrooms, it would be two separate applications, and there's a particular way you could go about crafting it that I'm happy to kind of walk you through how that would look. Give me a call, certainly. We can talk about it more. But if you just want to think about it as if the artist is at two schools, it'd be two applications for one school, one application each. No matter the district or anything else, really.
Okay, great. I think we have time maybe for one more. Can you talk a little bit about sustainability and TeachArtsOhio, and how can schools ensure that there's that continuity and support year after year with the project?
Right. I would guess that came from the fact that because this is a one-year program, there could be concern of sustainability or questions surrounding it. While it's true that TeachArtsOhio is a one-year grant, it is always really fascinating to see how current and past grantees build on what they've already established in the school. And I think there's a lot to be said about a teaching artist who the school and who the children are familiar with. In terms of continuity, I think that's a strength to one's application if they want to apply again. And in fact, we've got a lot of grantees who do come in for funding over multiple funding cycles. I think the key is that you would want to demonstrate how you intend to build on what you've already done. And it's not so much a rinse and repeat as it is a rinse and continuing to build on that. So I would certainly encourage you not to be concerned about sustainability, although it's always good to keep in mind and from a strategy standpoint. But we always accept, at least for TeachArtsOhio, we do accept funding from schools that they've been funded before. They are treated just as anybody else, and they're perhaps even well suited because they've been through the process already, and they can speak to what they've learned. And kind of, again, it's kind of the building blocks that I think really makes an application stand out.
All right, great. Well, I think we've come up on time here. That does it for today. Jared, thank you for guiding us through the basics and actually taking us into RD to see kind of what to expect once you get in there to actually write your grant application. I think it was really helpful. Hopefully after this, we'll get quite a few applications from today's attendees. We look forward to seeing what you come up with. Thank you to everyone for listening in today. Next up, it's 'tis the season for grant applications. Tune in next month when we'll be chatting with a few of our other program coordinators about our other OAC grant opportunities. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your week.